I want to start this review by stating very clearly and openly, I love Ghost Recon Wildlands. 4-player cooperative, massive open world where you can pick almost any objective and accomplish it however you like, but stealth is the preferred option. Sign me up. That's for me. Stealth plus open world equals my weakness. When playing with some friends, Wildlands is an absolute blast, but at the same time, it's sort of a guilty pleasure because it is riddled with problems. Its biggest problem? It's not Ghost Recon. At all. Not even a little bit. The squad and their CIA handler don't even refer to themselves as the Ghosts until the very end cinematic in a singular screenshot. No, Wildlands is more Far Cry meets Mercenaries and Just Cause, but that Tom Clancy name is powerful. Instead, I feel the wiser move would have been for Ubisoft to give it its own sub-franchise, like The Division. Would I play Tom Clancy Wildlands 2? Yes, I would, if they made some improvements.
Come here, fuckface. Back off, puto!
But the name Ghost Recon brings with it some expectations from the series fans, almost none of which are met in Wildlands. And before I get too far ahead of myself, allow me to describe what Wildlands is instead of what it isn't. You create a custom character that leads a squad of 4 elite soldiers charged with the task of dismantling an entire Bolivian cocaine cartel. You go into the country with a few weapons on your back, and little else. Played cooperatively, the game is sort of an open-world, Left 4 Dead-ish, arcadey tactical experience. Players can pop in and out of friends' games with almost no disturbances. Everyone's campaign progress is stored locally, so if you hop onto a friend's game who is working on a mission you've already completed, you can easily replay it again to gain more experience points or much-needed resources for upgrades. If you join a friend who is working on a mission you haven't done, you get credit for it as well, but if it's a major boss mission, you only gain the experience, and the story won't be spoiled for you. It's actually quite clever, and very well done. Cooperatively seems to be the absolute best way to play the game. Sure, it's functional as a single-player experience, but the squad AI when playing alone bothers me as a whole. I can't customize my squad. I can't decide which weapons they carry or what gear they're wearing. I can't decide how many squad members I want to bring with me. If I had a choice, I would bring 1 squad AI member, or 0. I can't tell individual squad members to move to specific places or perform specific tasks. They always move as a bunch. But their rigidly overly simplified controls are only half of the problem. They break the walls of immersion constantly. Drive off in a truck and leave them all behind, they all teleport right to your vehicle, even if they were all left dying in the last location. Spotted an enemy and want to synchronize your sniper fire? Sounds awesome, but your squad can, and regularly does, hit their targets even though that target might be out of view for them, like if the target was behind a brick wall, or in a cave. And they also can't be seen by the enemy AI, which is just weird.
This is the place. Tip is low and slow.
To put it bluntly, I truly can't stand the AI squad, and I wish I could have turned them off entirely to create an open-world Splinter Cell game with co-op. The open world here is gorgeous. The dynamic weather system, in combination with the day and night cycles, creates some eye candy as you explore jungles, rocky mountains, dry deserts, frosty wastelands, and tropical resort sites. From beginning to end, I was in love with the game's setting. Traveling around that world is a different story. Driving in cars and motorcycles is fine, but you're almost always best if you stick to the roads. The off-road terrain often gets too rocky or has too much vegetation to make it a reasonable route, which is fine. That's the way it should be. Air vehicles are a little tougher to come by, and they, by the way, have some pretty wonky controls. They are functional, but should be, and could be, so much better. Planes can only turn by rolling and pulling up, and helicopters operate so bizarrely, it's tough to put it into words. When at slow speeds, the throttle moves them up and down, and you can shimmy slowly forward and backwards, but not really side to side. And once you get the helicopter moving, it operates like the game's airplanes, where the only way to turn is to roll from side to side and pull up. Holding down the throttle maintains forward momentum, but doesn't change altitude. It's strange. Like the helicopters have 2 completely different control methods while operating the vehicle. and the transition speed seems to be the sweet spot I felt like I always wanted the helicopter to be in, while following enemy vehicles or performing better landings, which made doing anything tactical with the helicopters a near impossibility. They are best for ingress, egress, and transportation, not much else. And driving or flying anything with a mouse and keyboard is absolutely not recommended. I always kept a controller plugged in nearby. At first, I was unpleasantly surprised by how much was on the map. Gigantic open map, but bespeckled once again with Ubisoft Collectathon materials. Great. But as I made my way deeper into the game, I think this might be the best way Ubisoft has ever handled their Collectathon troubles, and it works very well for this game's setting. When you enter into a new territory on the map, you can capture lieutenants, speak to locals, or obtain unguarded documents that contain valuable information about the area. Locations of greater intel, supplies, weapons and mods, skill points, side missions, and more. None of it is mandatory. From the map screen, you can then mouse over each item and reveal what it is without personally visiting the area. Is it a gun mod for a weapon you don't use? You can skip it. Are you shopping for a specific new weapon or attachment? You can go to that location and try to get it. The game tells you which region guns and their modifications can be found in. Most items are pretty heavily guarded, and while it might not be a mission the game sets in place, it's a mission you've set for yourself. And that mentality is where Wildlands succeeds. Player self-motivation is huge. Many of the missions may follow a similar format. Go to location, execute target, destroy supplies, extract target. The wildly different locations and variation in enemy types and numbers are what keep it fresh.
The alarm is disabled.
I think the game does a number of things very right. Night and thermal vision are not only available, but they are downright super useful. In some Tom Clancy games, it's neat to have those things, but they don't really serve much of a purpose, other than to look and sound cool. You are packed with an upgradable UAV that you can use to scout out territories before you act. I'd like to note here that on the lowest 3 difficulties, enemy locations are assumed on the minimap using an orange cloud. I don't like that, that's too easy, and that's not me trying to be macho. Putting the game on the hardest difficulty increased my enjoyment of it tenfold, because it adds a layer of actions and consequences to the gameplay. It forced me to not only be careful because fewer rounds were required to kill me, but I had to find my enemies first, and if I goofed up, I had to live with my consequences. Something else minor that impressed me was the over-the-shoulder camera in third person. It has an intelligent switching system that will automatically shimmy from shoulder to shoulder depending on how close you are to a wall on either side. Pretty cool, but you can always shift it manually with the middle mouse button. I love the variety of weapons available, but at the same time, they don't feel like they make much of a difference. All sniper rifles and assault rifles, despite having wildly different stats, sort of all feel the same. On one hand, it makes the game great for cooperative play. New players are not held back by having lesser gear. On the other hand, aside from a cosmetic difference, there's not a great tactical advantage of one type of firearm versus another. I'm happy to say that enemies aren't bullet sponges. You aren't dumping entire clips into armor-clad super soldiers. They aren't psychic. You are hidden until you do something foolish, and they oftentimes will do their best to flank you. The story is sort of a missed opportunity. It boils down to kill the super stereotypical bad guy cartel leader by first taking out his officers. Ubisoft does their due diligence when it comes to researching their subjects. Through Wildlands, I've learned more about the process of making cocaine than I have ever before. They don't really speak much to how cartels come into power, or how they stay in power. Instead, the player just Mega Mans or Highlanders through each boss's home province and eventually takes out Dr. Wily. It's a shame. I would have been more interested in the ins and outs of legitimate cartels through this game. The voice acting ranges from super bland to okay. There's no performances that I was particularly captivated by. El Sueño, the leader of the cartel, sounds like someone doing an impersonation of Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin with a South American accent.
However, every time you cross a border, the value increases. It's a pipeline that carries the product to the people that need it. Sustenance for the thirsty. Once in place, the pipeline feeds itself. The voice acting of the male soldier, if you choose to play as a male, is passable.
The female voiceover actress sounds like she's on Valium. No emotion whatsoever from her delivery, and hearing her repeat the same things over and over again is enough to turn off all the voices in the game.
I've heard rumors about you guys. I was a rookie field officer in Moscow when the coup went down. There was talk you were involved? Must have been someone else. We were never there. It's not every day you get to meet an urban legend in the flesh. You should tell that to my kid. Maybe he'd listen when I tell him to take the trash out. Is it hard being someone who doesn't officially exist? You tell me, Karen Bowman, international aid worker.
Technically, the game ran okay for me. Not great, not horrible. One of my co-op partners witnessed regular temporary freezes while in helicopters, so we drove for him most of the time. I personally had a glitch where the game would occasionally not let me mark targets for sync shots. It would mark the target and then immediately unmark the target. It didn't happen too often, but when it did, it was frustrating. Otherwise, the game ran smoothly for me 90% of the time. The game has had one patch already, and according to the most recent patch notes, they're already planning for another in the near future. One final note. The game needs some better mission checkpoints, especially on the final mission, which is by far the worst mission in the entire game. Easily the worst. In a game where you are meant to at least pretend to think tactically and take your time to do things right, the final mission is timed, requires you to drive vehicles at crazy speeds, while your squad mates shoot out the windows at multiple helicopters while explosions go off all around you and you go over jumps and more. Why? What about that says Ghost Recon? And if you die on that mission, and you will die if you have the game set on the hardest difficulty setting, you will be set back several kilometers away from the previous checkpoint. Ugh. It has some technical problems. It has some gameplay problems. It has story problems. And again, I feel its biggest fault is that it calls itself Ghost Recon. But that somehow doesn't stop the game from being a ton of fun with friends. When you pull off a mission perfectly under heavy stress situations, there's no feeling like it. I don't really recommend it as a single player experience. Maybe I would if you could seriously turn off the entire squad, and I wouldn't pay full price for it. But if you're looking for a new cooperative experience with friends, I wouldn't hesitate to pick up a bunch of copies on sale and just have a great time together, trying to be sneaky.